Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Hey, for all of you out there that regret not being around the Soviet Union at the time of their collapse, you know, a lot of people have nostalgia about that, a lot of interesting things. Tavi was there writing in a journal. Anyway, they get to have that experience today right here in the good old USA. Stacy.
Well, that's actually correct, because we just did withdraw from Afghanistan. All empires, that's what they do. They withdraw from Afghanistan, where some reason over the past few hundred years they go to die. But, you know, this is something that we've been following as we have the Thucydides trap, the fourth turning, the debt cycle, all these things turning in such a way that the inevitability of the collapse is certain. And when you look back to the fall of the Roman Empire, what they did is they had the bread and circuses, right? And the bread and circuses were weaponized, right? Because it was the powerful senators and noble families versus the emperor, and you know, everybody was jockeying for power, and they would weaponize the bread and circuses. So we're going to look at the bread and circuses situation here in the United States at the moment, because I realized that, you know, it dawned on me that we started first with a circus clown, essentially, as a president, right, with Trump. And now we have like a hypnotist that's come in there with these coal black eyes and like, and he hypnotized the population. And you could see that with the post-Trump news slump. The post-Trump news slump continues online. Traffic has declined at leading news sites almost every month since January peak and from a year ago. Latest figures from ComScore. And they show catastrophe for almost all media outlets. Washington Post down 30%, New York Times down over 30%. We have some down 50, 60% in their traffic from the all-time peak of Trump era, and now down. So that was the clown show. The people liked it. Now the population's being hypnotized by the coal black eyes, right?
Yeah, I remember back in the old days in America, there was a tradition of the Dime Museum. So the Dime Museum used to be one in Times Square many, many years ago, where Houdini would perform at. And this was a collection of freak shows and magicians and hypnotists. And people would go in there for their one shiny dime and get quite a panoply of entertaining spectacles. And so we had the freak show of the Trump years in all of its glory, followed by the hypnotist of Joe Biden, who's kind of involuntarily putting the nation to sleep with his black coal dead eyes and utterances that are filtered through some kind of incomprehension screen. And the media, unfortunately, is not getting the audience that they need to survive. So this is leading to a Soviet Union-style collapse, because if you take spectacle out of the U.S., there's nothing left, right? It's like taking the bureaucracy out of the Soviet Union. Once the bureaucracy collapsed, the Soviet Union collapsed. With America, it doesn't work on a bureaucracy. It works on the spectacle industry. So everything is this outrageous spectacle, and it's covered by the spectacle news. And so when you remove the spectacle, you essentially are doing a rug pull. There's nothing left there. You know, the curtain falls, and it's just an empty theater, and there's nobody in the audience, and so there's no economy, sadly.
You like the Soviet Union. My particular thing, I like to compare it to the Roman Empire, because it does seem like, you know, we had the Senate, we had the emperor, we had the army, we had the Praetorian Guard, we had the bread and circuses, we had a vast expanse extending all over. They had their Roman roads. We have the internet that we extended throughout the world, and thus information was allowed to travel through, and heretical information was allowed to travel down those roads. So when I look at this, I look at the fact that, you know, when the empire starts to retreat, when it starts to lose power at the edge, that's when all of the spectacle arrives. The Romans, of course, left. You could go to Rome today and see all the amazing architecture and buildings, and, you know, the all sorts of stuff that they created there, right? But the U.S. will have, like, you know, we were the greatest show on earth. It was genuinely the greatest spectacle, the greatest show on earth. But unless you were there, you you don't remember it. Like, if you didn't go to Woodstock, you can't really know how amazing it was or how bad it was. Like, you had to have been at the show to have seen it and believed it.
Right, unless you were in America during its 240-year existence, you would really have no memory of it, right? If you can remember it, then you weren't really there, because there's nothing left behind except some landfills filled with some collector Nike trainers that for some reason sold for thousands of dollars.
We have the spectacle, and we have the circuses, certainly. We even, to the point where we elected a clown president who was a reality TV star. He was like one of the gladiators in the spectacle that we call television, reality television. They even called it, in a very comical sort of spectacle manner. But then, of course, the bread, we've seen the remarkable stimulus checks, credit, QE, all sorts of stuff being thrown around. Joe Biden says his multi-trillion-dollar spending plans will reduce inflation in the years ahead. So this is that sort of hypnotism that happens, and you just keep on looking into my eyes. Just keep looking in there. All this spending will actually reduce inflation.
Yeah, well, wheat is expensive and bread is expensive. So it's really more OxyContin, is the new bread in circuses. It's OxyContin in circuses, pretty much, opiates in circuses. And the results are catastrophic, of course. And, we're dueling Roman Empire, Soviet Union Empire. Remember, in the Soviet Union collapse, you had a whole generation of men essentially die from alcoholism. Here you've got a whole generation of Americans that are set to die from opiate addiction thanks to the collapse of the American empire, which could have been avoided.
I don't think it can, because the entropy always sets in, whatever the system is. Whatever system in history, throughout nature, entropy always gets it in the end. So that's the inevitability. It has to happen. And these are just the signs that we're looking at, that just like the business cycle, the notion is the central banks they convince themselves that they could do something to stop it, because who likes the business cycle? Who likes to put the neighborhood shop out of business? Who likes the destruction of capital like that? But it has to happen, because that's the cycle of life. And so let's turn to the cycle of this business, the business cycle applied to the media industry. So we covered the fact that their ratings have collapsed because apparently, the audience has been put to sleep, instead of they're not tuning in for the clown car, they're not tuning in for the clown show. So what has happened instead? What is, like, instead of, repivoting or doing something else different, they're changing their business model? Well, Outrage as a business model, how Ben Shapiro is using Facebook to build an empire. So that is the headline from NPR. And here is the response I was looking at. This NPR article is hilarious, if sinister. It basically boils down to establishment left-wing media outlets being salty that their content performs worse in the digital marketplace, and thus wanting big tech to shut down Ben Shapiro for ... beating them. That's what I'm talking about. The internet, the equivalent of Roman roads, delivering the barbarians and their messages outside of the elite center, the senators, the emperor, the president, the Congress. The fact that they control the message, and then suddenly all these people start poking fun, at the edges. And it disintegrates. The center collapses.
Right. And plus, what I don't understand is how come either MSNBC or Fox News or CNN is not just outright buying Ben Shapiro? In other words, in the past, when you had a rising force in the media, they would be bought out. And that's why there's only 5 or 6 big media companies in America. They buy out all the competition. It's an oligopoly. So instead of crying about Ben Shapiro beating them in the ratings, typically what we would see is that one of the majors would simply buy Ben Shapiro. Remember, Air America was a left-wing alternative media, and it was essentially bought out, all the players, by, I believe, MSNBC. Mm-hmm. And so, we have that option. We used to. Why is it that the media companies that are already openly oligarchic aren't raising money to buy out the competition in the same way that private equity is buying out all their competition? Why is the media not buying out their competition? I don't understand that. That's not even American. I mean, what is that? That's not even Soviet Union-like. That's not even Roman-like. What is that?
It is. It's like the Greeks. It's like the Romans. It's like Spanish. It's like the British. It's like what every empire. Hubris. They feel they should be obeyed, and that how dare you be a barbarian and have a different message, a different governance system, a different ideas than I do. So you obey me or you're destroyed. They don't like to negotiate. Diplomacy goes out the window, and they crush the competition, and thus the population begins to invite in the barbarians. So that's what you end up being, a tyrant, a dictator, and you get destroyed by the people. But I want to say another thing that they point out in this article. This is what NPR wrote, and this guy, Brad Palomo, calls attention to it. Quote, saying of these online barbarians, NPR said, they tend to not provide very much context for the information that they are providing. If you've stripped enough context away, any piece of truth can become a piece of misinformation.
Right. So the barbarians, the Ben Shapiros of the day today, are essentially what public access, public media used to be.
Yeah.
And what NPR used to be part of public access television and radio and media that was sponsored by the people. Even Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, they have their annual fundraising drives. That's what publicly funded media means. Mm-hmm. But now that they've all been co-opted by corporations and there is no public media anymore, you have a Ben Shapiro that goes to the readily available public media outlets like YouTube and others at this time, and they are providing an alternative that is outgrossing the mainstream corporate-led media, and who have their genesis in the public airwaves, without which none of them would have existed. So it's come full circle, and I think you're right. It is a matter of hubris. Typically, people come to believe that the free money that they've been given and the free airtime that they've been given through public access is somehow a birthright that they deserve and they're entitled to, and they go bonkers. All right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to our conversation with Tavi Costa. He's over there at Crescat Capital. Tavi, welcome back.
Thanks for having me again here.
I wanted to follow up on something from our previous conversation relating to M2 money supply. It's grown massively beyond the GDP growth since 2008, parabolically since the beginning of the pandemic lockdowns a year ago. Now, here's my question. Many on the left argue that this is necessary, not only to rescue the system, but to help the poor. Your response?
Money supply is, I think instead of taking it so much on the political side, I'm going to say it's almost, there is no way around this. The situation that we got into, which with the lack of discipline that really started in the 70s and the break of the gold standard and taking on more debt, I don't think there's really a way around this besides the increase of money supply. And especially now we're seeing more units of money supply to create growth, and therefore the issue that some call deflationary, which is the money velocity decline. I think in any ways, it doesn't really matter what the political party really is. The continuation of those policies is what ends, in my view, with inflation at some point. And the real question is when. But there's some real signs today that are starting to begin here. And you can see also the issue with the prevalence in the narrative of inflation becoming more of the trending, especially topic among the average Joe. Something we haven't seen since the 70s in the U.S. and sure some other places in the world may actually have experienced that.
All right, let me jump in here for a second, Tavi.
Sure.
So, how does the left explain inflation? What do they think is happening? How do they explain it?
Well, look, I think that the way they try to explain it is in a way is increasing the wealth of the bottom 50%. I wouldn't say explain it, perhaps justify what they're doing. And I think that the explanation in a way is that the wealth has been really much more towards the richer parts of the society, which is the inequality issue.
Yeah, but I'm saying that, do they understand when you print money, you reduce purchasing power for your fiat money, and you're actually causing poverty? Does the left understand that when you print money, they're causing poverty? Do they understand that?
it seems so simple. And you could say that with a lot, I mean, a lot of emerging markets that are very, even more left in the US have been doing that for a real long time. And they know that, but it's so apolitical to create discipline in the system and create stability for the currency and stop issuing debt and stop printing money to either, purchase financial assets or give it to the people, depending on what country you're referring to. In the US, I think it's actually less severe than other places, but it's bad, Max. I think what we're seeing is in a way it's inevitable, right? I mean, it's how do you reach the levels that we have of debt? Especially the private sector was looking really bad. We just transferred the issues, the imbalances, the macro imbalances in the private sector. We're basically transferring that from the private to the public sector. And so, but that, that still doesn't change the picture. The imbalances are still there, and the need for further increase of money velocity, money supply, especially in order to create shorter amount of units of GDP is still here. So it doesn't change the picture that you're referring to, which I think it's very important, which is this embedded inflationary force that is being created in the system, where a lot of, the bottom 50% doesn't know that. In fact, they don't even hold financial assets that actually protect them against those forces. And that's the sad part about this. And who actually suffers from those policies is actually the poor.
You are from Brazil.
Sure,
So,
yeah.
Okay, Latin America, Central America, they've been doing this for decades. It doesn't work. And America will look at Venezuela and say, hey, your country's all messed up. We need to invade your country, But so why are they adopting the Venezuelan monetary policy? Why are they mimicking? Is it the example of you become what you hate, right? America hates Venezuela, so they're going to become like Venezuela.
I think it's an extreme scenario. It could become an issue. It's not my base case. I don't think it's going to be that way. And the reason for that is because hyperinflation tends to happen, starts with the instability of the currency, which we're seeing in the US. We're seeing all over the world. But that leads to smart money to leaving that particular country. So in other words, you see large corporations is starting to have capital outflows from that place. We're seeing that today in Argentina. That's a great example of a place where most of the smart money is out. And so you start seeing a political environment to form that is stronger than any other political leadership. And that is when you start seeing this kind of Venezuelan style of hyperinflation. I think that that's going to happen in a place like Argentina. It's already happening, but I think it's going to get as severe as we're seeing in Venezuela. In the US, we still have most of the large corporations here. A lot of economies still do business with the US. If that's going to happen, it's going to have to happen worldwide, right? Because it's a relative game at the end of the day. But in my opinion, I think that's a little too far for us to even go there. I think that's going to take a few steps to get to the hyperinflation level. I like to focus mostly on, inflation going from single to double digits, and it may go back to high single digits, and we'll stay there for a bit. And I think that that's going to change everything, especially from a capital allocation side of things. And I don't think most of the investors are currently positioned for such an environment like that.
Okay, so to buttress your argument, you could look at the dollar, because the dollar's been relatively strong. You could look at gold. That's been relatively weak, right? And that's kind of what you're describing, is that, yeah, the US dollar is messed up, but relatively speaking, it's the cleanest shirt in the laundry, right? It's the least messed up compared to the rest of the world. What's happening in the EU? Their money supply, their money is being printed at a more accelerated rate than even in the US. Are any of these central banks, from your work and do the deep dive into all the statistics and quantitative analysis and whatnot, what's the ECB at the moment? Are they really as messed up as they appear to be? It seems like they're the weakest of the major central banks.
I would agree, even though I think from a fiscal side, as monetary stimulus especially would actually be used to fund fiscal, the way of targeting those stimulus and passing those through are a little bit more difficult than other areas. And I think that's why recently, not in the last month or so, but in the last year, we saw the strength of the euro relative to the dollar. But I don't think that changes the picture as a whole. I mean, we still have those countries are highly indebted. They have been highly indebted. And the only, perhaps the only positive thing that I can think of that may happen with Europe in the following years is regarding this remote work that we're seeing currently, which may change their economy in a way where we may see inflows of folks actually moving there to work towards that. But that's a long discussion. That's nothing to do with the monetary and fiscal side of things. I believe that that's, you're right. I mean, it's a relative game in most places, not only Europe. Will continue to do exactly what the U.S. is doing. I would point out, especially Australia. Australia has been doing even more than I even thought they would be doing in terms of monetary stimulus and expansion of the monetary base. And those places won't stop anytime soon, in my view. And the issue is that we're seeing the same inflationary forces worldwide. It's not only the U.S. or Europe. It's happening even in Asia too. In China especially. China is one of the most leveraged economies you can find in the world today. 300% of financial assets to GDP at a very closed capital account economy. How in the world they grew that level of leverage, especially from a financial asset perspective relative to GDP? It's kind of astonishing in my view. But going back to your question on Europe, on especially Europe as a whole, look, I think especially the UK is doing a few things, especially towards more money, the real monetization of that, I guess more direct monetization of that than other places. And all those I think will turn out to be the race to the bottom for fiat currencies and the need for alternative of monetary system. And there are plenty out there. You've been talking about Bitcoin for a long time. That's one of them. There's gold and there's silver. There's a lot of assets that can actually benefit. And
looking let me jump in. Yeah. So let's return to Latin America. And you mentioned Bitcoin there. We've got an unbelievable situation in El Salvador. They've made Bitcoin legal tender, and immediately property prices jump. They're talking about Bitcoin mining to bring in almost $1 billion in revenue next year. This is a $20 billion economy. The remittance market, 20% of GDP would be boosted just by the savings on remittance, right? And so this is, to put it into the terms, a quote, black swan almost. This is an unforeseen event by the IMF, the World Bank, the Fed. Nobody saw this coming except for Bitcoiners. And if this catches on, if the dominoes fall in Central America and Latin America, and the whole region goes to a Bitcoin standard, and now Russia even is talking about picking up mining from China. If we go to a Bitcoin standard and hyper-Bitcoinization, how much of would that pose an existential risk to the dollar?
I think you would. However, I just don't think any government with that type of mentality coming from South America, knowing that they like to have an authoritarian control of a lot of things, I just don't see, that move actually happening in a lot of those places. I highly doubt that Argentina is ever going to do that, given the political leadership, unless it comes from the population side of looking for alternatives, of doing anything that is outside of their own monetary system currently. But indeed, what you said, does create the demand for things like Bitcoin and other crypto assets and the whole environment in that of that asset class. And it could potentially become a threat. But I'm on the side that I think that it's, from looking at the political leadership and what they may actually do, I think that having control over what's actually happening is a higher priority than the stability of a currency. Even though I obviously agree that that's the right move. But I'm not here to tell you it's right or it's wrong. I'm here to tell you what I think it's likely to happen. So as an investor, I highly doubt that we may see that pattern happening in a huge way in a lot of other countries. But I've been wrong on this too. But
okay, so right, the countries like to be authoritarian. They like to have absolute control, but they're also, like all human beings, greedy. And if they see El Salvadorian government bringing in billions of dollars through tourism and mining, and their Bitcoin is appreciating, they're going to be like, hey, we want some of this action. Game theory kicks in, and humans are human, and they want to, make money. And if all the fiat money is collapsing, we only got about 20 seconds. But doesn't greed trump a dictatorship mentality in this scenario?
At some point it will, but at the same time, I think we're going to see exactly what we're seeing, which is the idea of creating their own digital currency, which has nothing to do with the whole point of creating or using Bitcoin at the first place, right? I think that's a lot more likely, unfortunately.
Right, but it's just a repeat of the fiat money, and it won't gain them any advantage whatsoever. And China's already made that mistake, and a few other countries, and now they realize that Bitcoin's the only way. All right,
Yeah.
Tavi Costa, thanks so much from Crescat Capital.
Thank you very much, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. Want to thank Tavi Costa of Crescat Capital. Until next time, bye, y'all.